Hey, look, YouTube, and welcome back to a new video with me, Rams fan YT. In today's video, we will be going over what my predictions were at the start of the season. Every season, I make predictions of which team will finish where from National League North and South, all the way up to a Premier League. Normally, I get them absolutely horrifically wrong and get rinsed in the comments about it. But let's get straight into it because it can be quite a long one. With National League North ones, I said that Radcliffe would finish bottom. They didn't finish bottom, to no surprise of anyone, I suppose. But they did finish in mid-table, very respectable end to the season, actually. I think a lot of people were maybe surprised about how well they did this season. They got to the 60-point mark, bang average. A real season of highs and lows all around. But yeah, far, far better than relegated. 23rd, we've got Peterborough Sports, and they were indeed 23rd. Everything I really predicted in this were true. A lack of goals was really a big undertaking. 51 goals was part of the problem, but it was more than 96 goals conceded, ironically, the worst in the division, that was the real reason they were relegated. And it wasn't too much of a surprise being the second team from Peterborough, and relatively speaking, struggled with match day attendances. 22nd, I got Oxford City. They actually finished 17th. They had a good end to the season. There was at one point that Oxford City looked like they were going to be relegated, but they had a solid end to the season, which saw them end up very safe in 17th. Could have ended up either way, to be honest. Oxford are in an interesting location, often one of the furthest of travels in the National League North. So I don't think it's a bad prediction. It's just that there were worse teams in the end. 21st, Bedford Town. They actually finished 18th, but it was only by a singular point. A different end to the season. If they didn't get that point, if Curzon Ashton then got a win, Bedford Town probably could have come away relegated. It was very close, and I think it is still going to be another uphill battle next season for Bedford Town. In all honesty, it was just their good end to the season did see them stay up by the skin of their teeth, which is somewhat how I anticipate next season going. 20th, I had Worksop Town, and for a lot of the season they were in around amongst it, and they were quite poor in both defense, very much in the defense aspect, but they did recover it to get into 16th. So again, another incorrect prediction, but if certain games went just margins, then I don't think this would have been too far off at all. So they did overperform my expectations, but so be it. 19th, Merthyr Town. It was a difficult thing to go across. Now, obviously, they finished in 8th place and therefore completely wrong on all fronts about this one. And, for a long period of the season, they were in the playoffs. It was hard to say. They were geographically isolated. It sometimes played quite negatively. I remember Bishop Stortford having that sort of problem a couple of seasons back. And so, yes, it is the case that it was really, really hard. And, you predict things so early in advance at this level that you never know, and they did provide to be a bit of an upset team. I had 18th South Shields. Now, this was a poor prediction. I think this is one of the worst predictions I made. It was one of them ones that Jeff Thompson, who was finally actually sold quite a large stake this week coming out, and he sold it to the British Virgin Islands Consortium, I think. But he didn't really look like he still wanted to be there. And at the time, they'd lost a fair few players, but, they were very strong this season. There's no denying it. They regularly put 4 or 5 goals past players. They were just 1 goal from that 100 goal mark. 95 points, very good season, and I strongly underestimated them. 17th, Curzon Ashton. I said at the start of the season they were a bit of a wild card, and I think they are a wild card, and they were relegated. And I don't think many people at the start of the season would have said Curzon Ashton would have been relegated. I don't think it crossed anybody's mind particularly. It was one of them ones they'll probably finish mid-table somewhere, and I sort of follow the crowd bit in that, maybe a bit below from what other people were saying, but they got 21st, which is a really strong finish. 16th, AFC Telford United. They actually finished upper mid-table. I had them in at lower mid-table. A really strong season, all things considered, for Telford. I thought they were going to be fairly comfortable and good enough to be in mid-table, and they were. When it comes down to it, the positioning doesn't matter too much. Was I roughly right with how they'd end up in the season? Yes. 15th, Macclesfield. Now, you've got to bear in mind at this time, Robbie Savage had just left, right? And he was sort of the architect of a lot of the success. They lost a lot of quality, and Rooney wasn't really much of a known quantity coming into this. So it was one of the ones they lost a lot of players, and it was a massive rebuild had happened after I made that video, so that they did project themselves into the playoffs in 4th place. I think they still underperformed where a lot of people were expecting them to go at the start of the season. I think a lot of people thought it was going to be another consecutive promotion. But I think, there's no denying that is on me of a poor prediction in that one. You can somewhat understand why. 14th place, Chorley. I thought this was quite good. They finished in 15th. They were roughly where I thought they were going to be. They had that unexpected blip. And, I do think that it is just one of them ones that they are just going to be a bit of a mid-table regular. If they end up like Curzon Ashton, which they could well end up doing, I think every season we see the National League North growing stronger, and traditional teams like Alfreton and Curzon Ashton are falling out. So I would be caution them in that regard. 13th, Scarborough Athletic. Scarborough really overperformed expectations for a lot of people. They finished in 6th. And that is in spite playing several of their home games at Bridlington. And, they really, really overperformed most people's expectations. And that's the wild thing about predictions. Sometimes things happen in football that you just can't predict. And Scarborough Athletic was one of them. 12th, we got dead on right with this one, of Marine. They finished 12th, bang on, and it was one of them ones that they never really looked like a team that were going to finish in 12th, actually, because they were several times on various variety of poor runs of form or whatever. But they somehow kept in mid-table. They never sunk below that threshold. So, 12th is an improvement. And I think next season could be another step in the right direction. They need to definitely improve upon their defence and their goal-scoring aspects. So a big off-season, but well done to Marine for continuingly to get mid-table in quite a tough league. Leamington, I had 11th. Now, they did horrifically this season, and I don't think there's much to justify it. They'd been in the National League North before, and I don't think this time around they were really that well prepared, in all honesty. I think I was just basing it off a plot of what happened in the past. And maybe it was just that Leamington weren't quite prepared to make the cut, and they weren't heavily invested from what I can gather. 10th, Darlington. They actually finished in 9th. There was 1 point difference, marginal. I think it was very obvious, when they started off that they're going to end this season as they ended the previous one. And so, I think Darlington, they're just going to be one of them teams. It's the two County Durham teams, isn't it? Darlington and Spennymoor, and even Hartlepool in the league above recently, just been knocking on that door of playoffs, but never quite being able to get over the line. And talking about Spennymoor, I had them in 9th. Interchangeable, really, between Darlington and Spennymoor. It could have been either way. It was just the opposite way around than the way I predicted. So I'm going to take a credit of a decent one on that one. 8th place, Buxton. They were actually in the playoffs. I had them to finish just outside. It did end up to the last day, but my days, 83 goals scored, very solid there. 61 goals conceded is also a very decent defence. I think Buxton, solid team. They're really building something. At some point, I suspect they may end up just getting over the line and getting promoted. But, the playoffs is a right lottery. But yeah, another very good season by Buxton for all things considering. 7th, Alfreton Town. Now, you know what? If you told me that Alfreton Town were going to be relegated this season 12 months ago, I would not have believed you. I really, really wouldn't have believed you, because Alfreton traditionally, they're a team which challenged in the playoffs, hence why I have them in 7th. Last season, yes, well, I suppose the season before now, 24-25, yes, was worse than they normally were, but I still didn't expect them to be anywhere near the drop. So it has to go down as a very poor campaign for Alfreton. I'm saying it now, it goes on to the players. A lot of them haven't really turned up for this season, and they've released all but one of their players. So I think it's going to be another tough season next time round. So, yeah, bad result and prediction all round for that one. 6th place had Southport, which I should probably not have gone with. They finished in 14th. They've really been underwhelming for the last fair few seasons now. Maybe I shouldn't have gone as ballsy as I did. When is this team going to get out mid-table and actually start performing again? It's been so long now, but they used to be in the Football League for years and years and years, and they're also in the conference for quite a while. I mean, to be in the National League North, it doesn't feel right. 5th, Chester. Well, they finished in 7th. It was on goal difference. It ultimately not a lot in it. I think we could probably count this as roughly right here. It wasn't really surprised. Most people thought Chester would be in the playoffs. They were in the playoffs. It is what it is. 4th, Hereford. What happened to Hereford? They went from being a team which was challenging the playoffs last season, or 24-25, if we turn back the clock. They looked like a team which would just about be ready to get over that threshold. And then they ended up spiraling. They've ended up just above a relegation zone. Very lucky, because there was a lot of time that it looked like they were going to be probably relegated. But, maybe a lot of it was down to a lot of games in short succession. I don't know. Let me know if you're a Hereford fan. How did you get to this position? 3rd, Fylde. They actually won the league. I mean, I probably should have had them a bit higher than I thought, but I said top 3 was going to be nailed on. It was the case. Maybe I should have gone a bit more further and said they were going to win the league. But yeah. 2nd, King's Lynn Town. Now, this is probably the worst prediction out of them all, isn't it? They finished just above a relegation zone in 19th. Yeah, 19th. But they had a very decent team. I thought, they had some good players all around. And they traditionally were right at the top end of the table, and therefore I can't tell you why they've been so poor this season. And maybe the Linux fans can tell me why, but looking on paper, they shouldn't have been anywhere near there. Kidderminster Harriers had to win the league. They did get promoted in the end via the playoffs. So, by hook or by crook, they got it. They got over that line. And I think it was fairly obvious to me that Kidderminster Harriers were going to go straight back up. And they did do. On to the National League South. Ebbsfleet United 24th. They finished in 9th. I mean, we are looking at the side that they were in a horrific position. They were really, really bad in 24-25 in the National League. They had a huge turnover of players. So it was just, for me, so hard to predict where they were going to go. I couldn't see them going in a good direction in the future. And you know what? 9th place, still think it would be probably considered by a lot of people a bit disappointing, considering the National League last season. But it stopped the rot, which I think is more important, because I was worried that they're just going to fall down the trapdoor and just carry on going, which we've seen a lot recently. 23rd, Bath City, finishing 21st. Relegation. It was only by 3 points. And yeah, it was fairly obvious to me that Bath were going to be relegated. There's been a lot of recent history of, bang average mid-table teams. I'm looking at the likes of Tonbridge Angels, Slough Town, Hampton Richmond Borough in the near future, which could all very much end up in that drop zone in the near future. Yeah, I didn't rate the manager, Darren Way, and I just thought, they were going to get relegated, and they were. 22nd, Tonbridge Angels. They actually finished in 14th. Very congratulations with a mid-table finish. I mean, it was a big, bold sort of decision to appoint Craig Nelson, but they appointed him, and he actually did all right. I just thought a lot of their players that they brought in were substandard. But yeah, they've just sort of been getting on with what they've needed to get on with, Bang average, nothing to really look at. 21st, Chelmsford City, and it has been they finished in 10th. It was sort of one of them ones that it looked like it could have been at one point a very underwhelming season, but then they had a solid end to the season, last 3 months or so. Now, Angelo Harrop, we do rate quite highly, but he'd just come off a spell at Braintree where he wasn't great. And at that point, it was looking like, could he have another relegation on his CV? And there was a lot of instability over the summer. 20th, Towton. I don't think anyone really expected Towton to do so well as they did do. Getting 12th, very solid. I personally didn't know. They were a bit of an unknown quantity coming into this, and they've been making several leaps of late. So I just thought, naturally going to be end up in a relegation battle. No, they've never looked in danger once all season. Bang average, been solid though. 19th, Dover Athletic, they finished in 20th, 3 points difference. Roughly where we expected Dover to be, in and amongst the fight, but just stay up at the end. That's what happened. A good building platform maybe to go on for next season. That remains to be seen, but I thought they were quite solid. 18th, Hornchurch. Now, I don't think anyone thought that Hornchurch would get promoted at the start of the season. I mean, I for one, thought second season syndrome. A lot of people had that down. It happens quite a lot. I didn't think they'll be relegated, but, I wouldn't have been surprised if they were. But they've done a phenomenal job. I have no idea how they've managed to get over the line. I don't even know if their stadium is National League standard. I think that sort of says all you need to know. Phenomenal job all around. But yeah, well done to Hornchurch, it must be said, because I thought, well, you know what I thought. 17th, Chippenham Town. They finished mid-table for like a decade, and now suddenly when I don't predict the mid-table, or predict the mid-table and they end up going and getting relegated, it's just absolutely farcical at this point. But yeah, at least they've been relegated. They've actually got some action involved with it, which means they can probably go for a promotion charge next season. That remains to be seen, it must be said. But they were only in, since 2016-17, there was only one season when they were promoted to National League South. There'd only been one season in the playoffs, right? They hadn't looked like they were anywhere near going down when I predicted at the start of the season. I don't know what happened, but they have been abject at best. this season. Atrocious is what the word I would really look for there. 16th Farnborough, it was only a point off, to be fair. I know they finished in 19th, but it was all a bit of a mumble jumble towards between the teams in 16th and 20th. Could have been any order come the end of it. And I think, we have seen that slight regression from last season. I think a lot of people probably thought so. They didn't look like they were going to improve. They haven't. If they take another back step next season where they are in danger of being relegated, I will say that now. 15th Dorking Wanderers. That's probably a bad prediction on my behalf. They finished in 4th. And they did lose a lot of their experienced heads in the dressing room. There was a lot of changes. And Mark White was suspended for the opening 6 games of the season. Maybe I was basing it on too short-term of thinking. That probably was the case because they did start the season quite poorly, if I do recall. And then they did sort of build up later. And then they ended the season actually quite badly as well. There was a point where it looked like they could have got the title. So 14th Hemel Hempstead Town. So they overperformed my expectations in 24-25. And then they overperformed my expectations again this season. So continually to overperform my personal expectations of Hemel Hempstead Town. I don't think anyone thought they were going to be in 5th, though, to be honest. I don't think I'm an anomaly in that regard. If you thought that Hemel Hempstead were going to finish in 5th, then hats off to you, because that would be a heck of a bold prediction to have them in the playoff. I don't think even Hemel Hempstead fans thought, they're going to shoot up to get into the playoffs. 13th Maidstone United. They finished in 8th. It was one of them ones that they had a strong end to the season. They were looking quite mid-table for a while, actually. And then Elo Kobai went on an absolute amazing run, and now he's obviously left Maidstone. But yeah, absolutely ridiculous end of the run of the season. It makes my prediction look to shame, to be honest. Because I could have looked like a freaking genius, but I'm not. 12th Salisbury. They finished in 17th. Maybe they could have performed a bit better. Maybe I should have gone for a bit lower down. It was an improvement from last season. The level of performance, maybe not as much of an increase as I maybe should have tipped them for, but they were decent overall. 11th Torquay United. Now, Torquay actually finished in 3rd. And a lot of people predicted Torquay to win the league in the playoffs, which didn't happen. So we take that as a technical win. But overall, I think it is an odd one with Torquay, isn't it? I should probably predict them to finish in the playoffs. They are a team that gets so near but so far. I think that's a fair summary of the situation. Losing against Hornchurch in the playoff final will forever haunt that team, though, because they really probably should have been the team to win that on paper. But, they didn't. 10th, I had Weston-super-Mare. They actually finished in 6th. It was all very cagey. They sort of dropped out of the playoffs, and then they had a good run to get back into it. It was sort of an in, out. You shake it all about. You do the hokey cokey, you turn around. Weston-super-Mare managed to do it, but they could well have finished 10th. They were all of the teams in that position were sort of picking up form at similar times, then dropping forms at similar times. They were like waves almost. 9th, Horsham. Horsham actually started the season very well. They ended in 15th, but if they continued the way they started, they could well have finished in 9th, because they were looking upper mid-table for a lot of it, and then they just sort of dipped. I think they may have been found out. But yeah, I think Horsham, a lot of people thought a lot worse of them. A lot of people had them to be relegated. So I don't have any regrets for what I said there. 8th, Chesham. They finished in 11th. I thought at one point Chesham was just going to power on through and get through it. And Chesham just logically looked like they were going to go, and they had some great signings. They had some real ability to go on to do it, and they looked like they could have done. And then they only got 1 point in the last 3 games, and that sort of blew off any of their hopes. If they carried on that amazing winning when they had before that point, they would well have been within a shout for the playoffs. So I don't mind that Cheshire prediction. It could have been slightly better, but it's sort of just been ending up running to stand still, in a sense. They're on a treadmill. 7th, Worthing. Now, Worthing won the league. I probably should have gone a bit harder onto this. But, they just lost Hinshelwood. He was a good manager, a very strong manager. And then you bring in Chris Laguta, who I thought was, a very good manager. And I thought, playoffs it will be. I was very confident on that. I didn't think they were going to be higher there than they were last season, though, which did prove me wrong. They've actually managed to get over the line. I'm excited to see what they do hold for National League. 6th, Maidenhead United. They finished in 7th, 1 point. Not a lot of difference, in all honesty. If they could, there would have been a little bit of changes. They were looking at the last day of the season, they were flipping around all sorts of teams within and out of the playoffs. But yeah, it was fairly obvious for me that Maidenhead were going to get at least playoffs. Even when for a long period of time in the season, they looked like they were not going to make it. And they made an inspired managerial change, and then they did. 5th, Dagenham and Redbridge. Very underwhelming season by all accounts for Dagenham and Redbridge. It really has been. To see them in mid-table in 13th is very, very poor. That side should not be that low. No way should they be that low. So that is got to go down as one of the most biggest underperformances I've seen in a while. 4th, Eastbourne Borough. Horrific prediction. They finished in last in 24th. Just showed how much for Adam Murray was really the thing which was keeping that team going, because he went to Kidderminster Harriers. He with Eastbourne, was getting them in the playoffs. They were doing great, and they looked like a great team. It was just one of them ones that, how do we see Eastbourne in the relegation? Awful. Nothing good has come of this season for Eastbourne. I was shocked. And generally, every week I'd look at the table and how? How are they this bad? 3rd, Enfield Town, another rubbish one. They finish in 23rd. Maybe I should put 2 in front of all of these ones. I was sceptical of Gavin McPherson. We'll say that now. And I probably over-egged the great survival thing. I thought they were going to do like a Darlington or something and just immediately have a great season afterwards. No, they just, they had decided to have another bad season, but no miracle this time round. You can't gamble on a miracle twice in a row. 2nd, Hampton Richmond Borough. I said they're either going to be relegated or do really well. No in-betweens. Actually finished in between. They finished in 18th. But there was a lot of hype around this team. Probably not warranted. We're going to swiftly move on for that one. First, I had Slough Down. We're just going worse and worse, isn't it? They finished in 16th. They were building for something. They were going in quite right direction, Slough. I'm not so convinced I could say the same thing anymore. I think they've sort of ground to a halt. Let's go to the National League. 24th had Boston United. How they finished 12th is, actually a well done on that, because that blew my mind. I thought, destined to go down. They only just stayed up last season. Didn't, to me, feel overly confident that they had built a big enough squad to be able to get them over the line. I certainly thought they were going to be in a relegation battle. They were far from it, though. The Lincolnshire outfit, very strong. 23rd, Yeovil Town, finished in 16th. I think the time is coming sooner rather than later when Yeovil do return to the National League South. They've not inspired me with confidence this season. I just think it's becoming a bit stale at the Hewish Park. One of these seasons they are going to drop down because they haven't been great. There's just been quite a low standard of football all around in the National League this season, actually, at the bottom end of the table. With a stronger calibre of teams down there, I think Yeovil could have been in a real sticky situation. Solihull Moors 22nd. They actually finished in 14th. I did say it was going to be a mad call. It turned out to be. But yeah, there's still, Nat Taylor, I believe Matthew Taylor actually ended up leaving Solihull Moors in the end. I'm trying to remember where he ended up going. He ended up leaving because they did. They did look under his tenure as if they were going to go down, and if they didn't get rid of him, and they got rid of him very early, by the way, I will say that now. It was like September. It was the first managerial casualty, maybe even. And, if they kept him, I think it probably would have ended up with Solihull being relegated. So, again, you can't predict, they're suddenly going to drop their manager within 2 months of the video going out. 21st, Woking. They were in 10th. They had a really good season, Woking, actually. I think, he didn't do a great job with York, Neil Ardley. And I think he was the sort of manager who tended to get teams relegated. So Woking have done very good in my estimations. I would not have expected that at the start of the season. My first right one that we've had in quite a while now is 20th place at Aldershot Town. Probably not too difficult of a one to predict, to be honest. They were always a team that were likely to finish in that bottom half, involved in a relegation scrap, probably just stay up towards the end of the season, because they have been around about there since 2018-19, and they have, been there for a while. When they actually end up dropping down, maybe things start changing. 19th, Brackley Town. Ended up relegated in 21st. For some time, I did think maybe, just maybe, they could stay up. It was sort of ones that they looked good at the start of the season. They were really good. They were about mid-table and then sort of got found out and started floating down slowly and did actually get relegated in the end. It's not easy to adjust to National League football. I will say that now, and caution all the sides going up. There is a big difference now emerging between these two leagues. And I think Brackley found it this season. 18th, Truro City. Bit of a similar story. I just thought the difference is that Truro's just been on the foot of the table pretty much the whole season. I think there's been a couple of games they managed to float up, but it's still in relegation zone. I can't remember if they were ever out of relegation zone. They've been truly horrific. I thought, their home ground being it's so remote and whatever, that it was going to be a bit of a fortress, but away from home it would be dire. Just transpired that neither was necessarily the case. 17th, Boreham Wood. They got promoted in 24-25. No one's talking about how good Boreham Wood were. How on earth they finished fourth is utterly beyond me. That, I did not expect at all that to happen. If anyone put on for Boreham Wood to be in the playoffs, they have got themselves a handsome payout, because that is what must have been the odds of that? Absolutely, at least 50-1. That is a ridiculous thing to predict if anyone went with that, because they were just in the National League South. Mid-table I could understand. Playoffs, whoa. Well done to Boreham Wood. Absolutely far surpassed my predictions of 17th. which I thought, was a favourable prediction. 16th, Gateshead. It wasn't really a season I criminally underestimated Gateshead because I actually did far worse. We finished in only 1 point below in 18th. But that is in part thanks to, getting rid of Alan Armstrong, for one, who did a horrific job, but also bringing back Rob Elliott, the old favourite. So it'll be interesting to see how they manage next season. I've spoken to some Gateshead fans. They are very pessimistic. They think they're going to be in and around the bottom of the league. They're going to be in a position where they could even end up bust. Very doom and gloom around Gateshead at the moment. Rob Elliott obviously gone to Carlisle within the past week. So that's where a lot of the negativity is coming from, of course. But also the owners just aren't interested at the moment. And I think that really does bleed out. I suppose the one lucky thing is that they don't have to play South Shields, because that could have been such a interesting derby day. 15th, Braintree Town got relegated in 23rd. They just stayed up they finished in 17th last season. It was a surprise package. I should have said for a second season syndrome, maybe. But I thought, they were marginally improving and marginally going in the right directions. But no, it was a tough National League and they were relegated. Rightfully so. I don't think it was necessarily second season syndrome. I just thought it was probably a stronger league than we've had seen before. 14th, Wealdstone. They finished in 15th. We're going to allow it. It's 6 goals, goal difference. It's basically the same position. I thought, a step forward, and yeah, there was. Relatively simple. 13th had Eastleigh, who actually finished in 17th. A bit of an underwhelming season for the Hampshire-based team, who might be in trouble, actually, for their involvement with Southampton Spygate. But that's sort of all hearsay on social media at the moment, so I'm not going to go too much into it. But yeah, they have sort of been mid-table every season since 2018-19. So it wasn't a mad prediction to make. They finished in 17th, which I don't know if you count that as mid-table or not. It's getting towards the edge of it, isn't it, and being in that fight. 12th, Morecambe. Really poor season by Morecambe because they got rescued. They should have performed much better than they did. These new owners, I'm not making a huge... I'm not liking what I'm seeing, though. They got relegated to National League North. It's just a slippery slope at the moment. They may go back to being a Northern Premier League side in the not too distant future. Now, some of you fans who were around during the 1980s and 70s will say, well, that's probably where they belong. Some of the fans like me who have been watching football for over 10 years now, I think it would probably be about 11 years now I've been watching football. My first games I watched was the 2010 World Cup, but domestically would have been 2014-15. So, yeah, 11 years odd of football. Morecambe were always, a regular feature in the Football League, League Two sort of position. So it's been a large fall off for Morecambe, and I don't see it resolving itself anytime soon. 11th, Sutton United. Okay, they finished in 19th. It's not great. Well, they were relegated. I thought, mid-table National League side. That's sort of where Sutton have accumulated over several seasons. I mean, had that amazing run into the Football League. Don't think anyone particularly expected them to be involved in the Football League. But yeah, I think Sutton are a team which probably are slowly floating back down at this point. And maybe 11th was probably much an overestimation, maybe. 10th, Scunthorpe United. Maybe I should have fully backed them. They're finishing 5th. Not really too surprising. They are a former Football League team. There was a lot of confidence around them at the start of the season. But, they were just promoted as well. So I did also, at the same time, treat them like a newly promoted club. Because as soon as you start treating a newly promoted club just because they've been there before any bigger, you suddenly start looking a bit of a mug. If you start saying, "Oh yeah, Scunthorpe got promoted last season, we get promoted this season." Ninth, Rochdale. This is a woeful prediction. They finished obviously second place, winning the playoffs. I'm going to shut the window because there's so many birds. I don't know where all them birds have come from, but they suddenly all decided to rest on the roof. So, yeah, in terms of Rochdale, very amazingly good season. How you get 106 points and not automatically promoted is absolutely ridiculous. And I'm sorry. I apologise to everything about Rochdale because that was a fantastic season. 8th, Halifax Town. FC Halifax Town. Well, we're starting to get to the point where I got a lot of calls right. This was one of them. I thought they were just going to finish shy of the playoffs. They actually were 11 points, the difference between 8th and 7th. It was fairly obvious they were going to be just outside the playoffs. I think they have been for a fair few seasons now. And that's sort of where they ended up, not quite good enough to be the playoffs, and therefore were just outside it. 7th, Altrincham. This was a horrific call. They finished in 13th. I probably should have said mid-table. But they seem to be competing for the playoffs for the last couple of seasons. And, I think this season may go down as a bit of an underachievement. They may get rid of Phil Parkinson as well for the long, he was the longest serving Altrincham manager. So he took them from Northern Premier League to becoming a professional club and almost knocking on the doors of getting entry into the Football League. That hasn't happened since, when Altrincham won the conference with it back in maybe it was the Alliance Premier League in days, the 1980s. So yeah, it's probably not an underperformance, but it wasn't what I expected. 6th, Southend United. It was fairly obvious they were going to be playoffs again. They snuck in last season. They were very comfortable this time round. There was no needing to be snuck in at all through the back door on the last day or whatever. They were comfortably in the playoffs. It's a shame Kevin Maher has left Southend. That era has come to an end, and will be interesting to see. I'm obviously not going to reveal my hand too early about the predictions video, but how will Southend adapt to that? 5th, Tamworth. I thought, they'll carry on moving up and up and up. And Andy Peets, I thought, great manager. They finished in 11th, so still a very good season all round. But they were sort of on a very, very upwards directory, if you want to say it like that. And all four of them, they carry on going. He took them up to a game against Tottenham in 2025. It wasn't this season, it was the season before. But yeah, absolutely incredible work by Tamworth, but not playoff quality in 11th place, which I think is about right. I think if I was a bit more sane-minded, or conservative, I would have gone with that. 4th, Hartlepool United. Okay, that is not great. Hartlepool have stuck themselves in this position that they can't get into the top 7. They're not being backed enough by their owners to be able to get over that dotted line. They should be. They should be definitely good enough to get into the playoffs, but they just aren't at the moment. It's a bit of a difficult position. 3rd, Carlisle United. Again, another dead-on prediction. You always knew what Mark Hughes were going to perform, and Carlisle were always going to do strong this season. It was inevitable. It's where they've ended up going. 2nd, Forest Green Rovers. Now, I think they've underperformed this season to get 7th. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comment section, but, they brought in Robbie Savage, who had been it was a bit of a risk, admittedly, but he'd done a good job with Macclesfield. They had a good they were heavily investing in as well, and you thought, they're going to give a really good account and they'll really go for it. 7th place feels like an underperformance to me. I mean, it doesn't make much difference at the end of the day. Whether you finish in 7th or 2nd, you're still going to have to take place in the playoffs. But yeah, I just thought they were so inconsistent at times. Like, yeah, I think that should go down as an underperformance. First, York City, it was fairly inevitable last season, or well, I need to stop saying last season, but 24-25, they finished with 96 points and just missed out on promotion. There was no doubt in my mind that they were going to go a step further and gain the title this season. It was just fairly obvious for me. Into League Two, and we've got Cheltenham Town, who I predicted to be bottom of the league. They actually finished in 18th, and there are times when it was looking like this prediction might have come off. It didn't, obviously, but I don't think it would have been a horrific call, because there were some really bad and shaky moments in the season when they were in and amongst that picture, especially at the start of the season. They brought in Michael Flynn. He's not done a great job previously and a good track record. And obviously now they've got Steve Cottrell. So if they kept Michael Flynn, I think it could well have been a relegation. 23rd, Shrewsbury Town, another team who were in and around that picture in 19th. But we've seen some very weak teams in the bottom two this season. And I think if they ever do consider the 3 up, 3 down, we are going to see some big teams like Shrewsbury falling into the National League more frequently than we have seen in the past. So, yeah, I think that's going to be one which, if they do open a pyramid, it wouldn't look too stupid. All right, I'm going to open back. I think the bird's gone now. It's just really, really hot in this room. 22nd, I went with Harrogate Town. They finished in 23rd. There was a point in it. You could have done it on the last day. If you only had done it on the last day and won and stayed up, I would have looked like a genius in it. But they didn't, and they were relegated. It was, touch and go at times, and they did look like potentially they might do it, potentially not. There were a few good wins at the end of the season. Yeah, I did say it was going to be very narrow margins in it and that they were punching above their weight for years. And that does transpire. It was a point in it. It did go right down to the last day. And, just to the other side of that dotted line from where I predicted. 21st, Gillingham. It was an underperformance by Gillingham. I think it's really gone under the radar just how abjectly boring Gillingham are. And I think for a lot of Gillingham fans, they are worried about the long-term prospects of their club. They are gradually regressing, going backwards. No aspirations looking like it at the moment for Gillingham. Gareth Ainsworth has done a horrific job with the club. And I don't have any regrets saying that they were going to be involved in a relegation battle, even though they weren't. Next season, they could well be, 20th, Barrow, they were actually 24th. There was at times when they could have potentially gone for it because, Newport will look like they were going to relegate for ages and they finished in 20th. So if Barrow did exactly the same thing, I would have been great, but they didn't. So I just look a bit stupid now for Barrow. But I suspect both Harrogate and Barrow, it won't be too surprising to many people that they will be back in the National League. And probably evens it up a bit because I don't think they're the greatest teams. 19th, Walsall. They finished in 13th, or maybe over-expected the downfall. I think everybody sort of anticipated maybe a bit of a downfall. They had the wheels fall off last season. They have the wheels fall off again this season. If their wheels had fallen off throughout this season, 19th would have been a very reasonable predictions. But they actually did start the season relatively well and then capitulated again just earlier this time, and therefore greater of a fall. 18th, Crewe Alexandra, finished 11th. Decent season all round for Crewe. I was one of them ones that, he was sort of, I thought they were a team that, how do I phrase this? They were a team which I thought had spent a lot of years knocking the door of the playoffs, which they didn't do this season. They finished in mid-table this season. And they were a bit exhausted and, they were going to drop down a bit. And it would have been fine because it would have just been seen as an off-season. Wasn't really the case. There was at times where they did look like they could have got to the playoffs, but they ended up in mid-table because I don't know about it. They had one win in the last 6 games. They really threw it away because they could have definitely finished in the playoffs if they put their minds to it. 17th, Swindon Town, but I don't think anyone would have expected Swindon to finish 9th at the beginning of the season. Like, I know how good Ian Holloway is considered, but come on. He couldn't have worked a miracle. Like, he clearly has. He's got them in 9th, but a lot of people had Swindon, finishing in the relegation zone and stuff. I was on the more optimistic end of the things of the League 2 predictions. So it does make me look. I still look like a mug from it, but at least I don't look as mug as some other people do. 16th, Salford City. That was a bad prediction. We did finish in 4th in the end. I don't have any justification behind what I said about Salford, so I am just going to say it now. That was a bad prediction. We're going to move on about it. 15th, Crawley Town. 22nd, bad season all round for Crawley. Scott Lindsay came back to Crawley. He crawled back and was sort of in the position that he had done a good job with Crawley in the past. Didn't work. There is that saying, don't go back to your manager, although the Gateshead manager, Rob Elliott, proved that kind of wrong, didn't he? But maybe he shouldn't have returned. But I thought, Crawley could have ended up a solid mid-table season. 14th, Bristol Rovers, one we got right. Way! Because I'm fed up of getting ones quite badly wrong. But because Bristol Rovers actually were for a while looking lower mid-table, and then they sort of went on a fantastic run at the end of the season and got me the bag of what I expected them to do. Not in a million years is how I expected it to happen. But yeah, I think a lot of people thought Bristol Rovers would probably do slightly better. And I'm in this position of saying they're going to be mid-table. I think most of them thought, outside shout for playoffs. 13th, Notts County. To be fair, you looked at Martin Patterson's record as being a manager previously. It wasn't great, right? And they had lost David McGoldrick to Barnsley, hadn't they? And I had some concerns in that regard, and in terms of goal scoring, but which did prove to be a bit unfounded. They scored 74 goals, which was the joint second best in the league. And overall, Notts County did thoroughly deserve their playoff win at the end of the day. So yeah, a lot of people probably would have thought, looking at Martin Patterson, I don't know how highly rated. He didn't come in with great fanfare, that announcement. But clearly was the final missing ingredient. 12th, MK Dons. We do look about what happened in 24-25. MK Dons were mid-table. They were full of dross as well, And Warne has done what Paul Warne does, transform his team into a winning project, got them into League One for next season. Yeah, just one of them ones that MK Dons just nobody really wants them to be promoted, but so be it. They are now. Can't change the past. And I'll have to give him credit for it, but he has got a huge wage bill and huge expectations, and he's performed admirably under it. 11th, I had Oldham Athletic. They finished in 10th, 1 point difference. It's not too surprising for me. It was sort of Oldham were a strong form of league team. For years, they were sort of mid-table in League Two. It was just like back to normality and back to the good old days, wasn't it, with Oldham? Not really expecting too much of them. 10th, Newport County. Yeah. They did stay up. They finished in 20th. I don't know what I was thinking going with 10th. I didn't rate Nelson Jardine. And yeah, I don't know what the Newport admins are doing when it comes to appointing managers. It seems to be like we're going to pluck some geezer from absolute obscurity and hope that he works miracles. I don't know why they do it. They persist to do it. And so far, they've just been holding on by the skin of their teeth. But, flipping heck. I mean, you couldn't write this, could you? Of like, which one's going to be the next one they pull out the hat? 9th, Accrington Stanley finished in 16th. A bit of an underwhelming season for Accrington Stanley. I mean, they're still in a decline. They're still at rot at the Wham Stadium at the moment. Do they bring John Coleman back? He hasn't done a great job since he's left him, in all honesty. But John Coleman and Accrington Stanley, they are, permanently two clubs which will go together in your mind, 8th, Tranmere Rovers. Yeah, they did finish in 21st, and probably in hindsight, even a bit of foresight, should have just seen that coming, because they've been in decline for a while now, have Tranmere Rovers, and it is just one of the things that I think a lot of Tranmere fans are worried they're going to be relegated next season, quite rightfully so. In all honesty, they were very shaky, only 2 points per relegation zone. They had some bad games in them as well. 6th, Fleetwood Town, a bit of an underwhelming season for Fleetwood, in all honesty, because they were in League One not that long ago, were they? And I think a lot of people were probably expecting them to, get into the playoffs this season, actually go up and go at it. Could Fleetwood end up following Morecambe into a position where they too end up going down a slippery slope into positions of the National League and National League North? It's always a danger. They're teetering. They are teetering. 5th, Colchester United. In 12th, yet again, I'm trying to back Colchester as a dark horse. It's like I've done it for years with Lincoln City. And you know what? Maybe next season, Colchester will actually be the dark horse. And I've just predicted it a season too early. Yeah. I want to say now that I think Colchester do have the capabilities of being. They could have finished like a couple of places higher, surely. They had some great runs of forms at the time, but maybe not yet ready for playoffs. 4th, Bromley, and actually finished first. Like, I did think Bromley were going to get playoffs. I thought they'd carry on going with a good journey, carry on going steps up and steps up. And, we've got to give it a large round of applause for Andy Woodman and the work he has done with Bromley, transforming it aside from a mid-table National League side to now, getting them into League One for the first time ever. It's been a great journey to watch this team grow. They could well become the next Wimbledon. I'm not talking about SC Wimbledon, I'm talking about Wimbledon FC, just going up and up and up and then come crashing down, obviously. But hopefully they don't move to somewhere like Milton Keynes again. But it is going to be one of them ones that it'd be very interesting to see where is the ceiling for Bromley. 3rd, Grimsby Town. They finished in 7th. I did suspect they were going to get automatically promoted, but they've ended up in the playoffs. They have that sort of archetype with David Artill's side that we're going to do quite well at this level, and they sort of have proven it. I thought at some times that they were going to do maybe just throw themselves into the top 3, but alas, they didn't quite have that capabilities at their disposal. But a solid team, Grimsby Town, and I wouldn't ride them off too far down the line, potentially getting promotions. They'll probably get lucky in the playoffs at some point. 2nd, Cambridge United. They finished 3rd. It was sort of where I expected them to be. Top 3 sort of thing, automatically promoted straight back up to League One. They're a good side, Cambridge. They really are. And they're one of them typical ones who are sort of mid-table League One side, which is where they may end up next season, but we'll have to see. First, Chesterfield, well, it does come with the category of a bit of Derbyshire bias, this channel, but they did well. Chesterfield, they're continually to get another playoff finish in their belt. Just disappointing that, they couldn't overcome Notts County, which they just can't ever do in the playoffs. They seem to play each other in the playoffs a lot recently as well. Maybe next season, without Notts County in the league, they can also go on to one further and get promotion as well. They're sort of like always playing cat and mouse with Notts County and ending up snaking up the leagues. League One, and I'm going to start off with a correct prediction, and that's bottom of the league, Northampton Town. Are we too surprised? Maybe not too much that they finished bottom of the league. I certainly wasn't surprised by such a statement. I didn't think Kevin Nolan had what it took to cut it out at League One level, and he didn't. They finished bottom of the league. Yeah, they just didn't have a League One standard squad, to be honest. 23rd Peterborough United. For a long, long time, Peterborough did look like they could end up relegated. I think they were around about 22nd, and then they had a decent run of form. And the thing is, I think a lot of teams around them at the moment have just not been great. There's never been a consistent winning run by any of the teams in sort of probably the bottom from 18th to 24th. I don't think anyone has really had a marquee run. So they're just a bit lucky. I think they've rode their luck a good few times. But, sometimes you need to. Another team a bit like that is 22nd and Wigan Athletic. And Wigan Athletic were also in the relegation zone for long periods at the start of the season. And then they sort of gradually started evolving and they ended up in mid-table in 16th. So I think Ryan Lowe was a failure at Wigan. I think we can all probably agree that Gary Caldwell was sort of the man which came to the rescue. I sort of have to base the predictions on the manager I'm seeing in front of me because I don't know who they're possibly going to appoint next. I still have worries for Wigan in the future. There's no guarantees that they are not going to end up plunged into the relegation battle again in the near future. That's certainly capable. 21st AFC Wimbledon, finished in 19th. They were very lucky in a sense that a lot of the teams around them were also quite poor. Because I thought for the longest time that they were actually going to be relegated. And then Exeter somehow dipped at the wrong time. Leyton Orient dipped at the wrong time. And, Wimbledon actually managed to stay up just about. So we will have a local rivalry between AFC Wimbledon and MK Dons next season. It was no surprise to anyone that I had 20th place being Burton Albion, and actually they've gone a bit better and got 17th. And Gary Boyer seems to be doing a fantastic job with the Brewers in a very low budget of a squad that he does have to assemble every season. Burton are normally normally towards the bottom, if not the bottom team in terms of budget, in terms of fan bases, all of that sort of stick. So to manage to routinely, stay up in League One, he's got to be commended for the Staffordshire team. And I wonder if, we could have the next Nigel Clough story coming up with Burton. You never know. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, though, at this moment in time. 19th Stevenage. I think if you spoke to anyone at the start of the season and said, you know what, Stevenage are going to finish in the playoffs, not a single one of you would look back at you and say, yeah, I could see that happening. Everyone thought they were going to be in a relegation battle, or maybe mid-table, but I don't think playoffs was ever on the record. Steve Evans had gone. He was a good manager for the club. And then Alex Revel came in, and he was a bit questionable at the time. There were a lot of questions raised. He's obviously dissuaded every single fan over any question marks that people may have over him, and have done a fantastic job. 18th Exeter City, they actually were relegated this season. A rather disappointing season. If Gary Caldwell stayed at Exeter, they probably would have just about stayed up. But him leaving was just sort of, it marked the end for Exeter. And Down to League Two they go. I think it's been maybe on the cards for quite some time. It wasn't too great of a surprise for me, but it happened. 17th had Bradford City, another team which I completely did not expect to finish in the playoffs was Bradford. They are growing and growing and growing, and I think we're beginning to see that maybe Bradford could be. I wouldn't be too surprised if they are involved in the playoff picture again next season. Maybe even top three. Could they get top two? I'm not quite sure yet, but they are a team that they've got the fan base. They've always had a great and loyal fan base. It's just whether they can progress onto the championship, and it's been a long time coming if that is the case. 16th, Rotherham United. Well, they did even worse than I thought. 23rd. I thought they're going to continue to regress and maybe get relegated in a couple of seasons' time, and they've just gone shooting through the leagues now. They had a mid-table season last season. Season before that, relegated. They have been a roller coaster of a club over the past decade now. Absolutely, they're like, boom, 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 boom. They'll probably get promoted next season, knowing them. But yeah, it's come as a bit of a surprise, really, that Rotherham will be playing in League Two next season. End of a long road. 15th had Barnsley, which I think a lot of people may be surprised. They did underperform last season as well, much like Rotherham did, and it was a bit of a gamble to have Conor Hourihane in. So it was almost, in a sense, look, they're going to just try and remain static and sort of see out this bump. I don't know if that's a wise idea. We could well see them in the near future sort of also following Rotherham down through the trapdoor. Hence why I think Conor Hourihane's been released, hasn't he? Or was mutually parted company. 14th had Blackpool. They actually finished 13th. It was only on goal difference. It was sort of expected. I backed Steve Bruce at the start of last season, but I think now he has actually made Blackpool weaker overall. I stand by every single word of that statement I made about a year ago, or 10 months ago. Ian Evatt came in and he's a good, solid League One manager, right? He turned what was an absolute dross of his Blackpool team, which was destined to be relegated under Steve Bruce, turned it right round and got them to mid-table. So, yet again, I think Blackpool could even potentially next season, we could start seeing them rise back up again and maybe even Championship in the near future. Because Ian Evatt, he doesn't necessarily have the chops to get promoted via the playoffs, but he knows how to get playoffs in the League One. And if Blackpool ride the wave with him, I think they will be quite happy with the end products. 13th place Cardiff City was really, really hard because, Brian Barry Murphy has sort of written his name for a lot of people now with Cardiff. Nobody had heard of him beforehand. You had Vincent Tan, who was an awful owner. It was like, surely that wasn't going to be a great season overall for Cardiff. They were just going to carry on declining. But I think Vincent Tan realised, well, I think a lot of it goes to Brian Barry Murphy, who sort of decided, look, we need to get back to Championship football as quick as possible. And to be fair, Cardiff City, massive team, too big to be in League One, and rightfully were promoted back. But yeah, 12th Leyton Orient, very poor season for Richie Wellens' side, really poor. I don't think anyone was really expecting them to be competing in playoffs this season, but to see the downfall that we've seen this season has been quite tragic at times to see, really. It really has. 11th place Reading, they finished in 12th, 3 points difference. Oh, goal difference, on difference. It was sort of expected around about that, wasn't it? I think they're sort of one of them ones that had a very similar season again this season when we had in 24-25. They looked like they were going to be able to get to playoffs, and maybe they fell away. They fell away quite big this time, actually, to drop down to 12th. But yeah, they're one of them ones that is why they're in mid-table. They can't play a whole season. I don't know if Royal fans are content with that. 10th place at Plymouth Argyle, they finished in 8th. It's sort of roughly where I expected them to finish outside the playoffs. Not quite good enough to get over the line. I think Plymouth are still underperforming of the capabilities that they have, but a lot of their players are now getting assets stripped left, right, and centre. So it's going to be a large job to rebuild over this summer if they are to try and be competitive next season. 9th, Bolton Wanderers, they finished in 5th. I was a bit... it was like, right, Ian Everett's gone. He's masterminded a lot of his success. And, they completely changed to Steven Schumacher, who's a completely different philosophy of footballer. One's quite attacking, one's quite defensive. I just thought, that's a big switch to make. And you know what? They have declined in terms of positioning. They're finishing 5th as opposed to top 3. But I don't think Bolton fans really mind because they've been promoted via the playoffs. If he didn't get promoted via the playoffs, though, a lot of people probably would be calling him for him to go. I'm not going to lie. They have, ironically, fallen upwards in this regard. So I feel bad for Ian Evatt in that regard. 8th, Stockport County, finished in 3rd. I think continually, Dave Challoner is continuing to surprise a lot of people. I don't think many people thought, Stockport were yet again going to get a strong playoff situation that they, 2-3 years down the line, we could see them mid-table in the Championship now. And I don't think you would really be too surprised about it if they continue to build. Now, the question is, a lot of people are saying, look, Dave Challoner is going to leave and take the Lincoln City job, which I can completely understand, but it feels like a bit of a stupid jump to make when his side is so close to getting Championship football himself. So I think if I was him, you'd probably want to stick it out with Stockport for at least one more season. 7th, Mansfield Town. Thought Nigel Clough would have done slightly better. They've sort of been a bit of a all over the mid-table positions, Mansfield. And if they got that run a bit earlier, okay, maybe they could have finished in 7th. But likelihood. Well, they did do well, right? Don't get me wrong, Mansfield did do well this season. But whether it's one of them ones that I don't know if they've got a good baseline to now build upon for next season and go and get that extra level across, not sure. If we get Mansfield Town in the Championship, that's going to be absolutely ridiculous, by the way. 6th, Lincoln City. Here we go. It wouldn't be a League One prediction video without me saying that Lincoln is going to be the dark horses. So here I am again. Let's be honest, before Michael Skubala was appointed manager of Lincoln, how many of you had heard of him? He never played football and only had an interim spell at Leeds beforehand. But then I compared him to Thomas Frank, and he has had an immense amount of success. And I feel Lincoln now are going to struggle. He got 103 points, They're going to struggle because he's gone to Bristol City. Lincoln City went from a side that looked like, we're going to be the surprise packages to many people in the Championship to, they're gone now. Apparently, Chris Cohen and Tom Shaw are the co-head coaches of Lincoln City. That's going to be interesting to think about what on earth is going on with that. I don't know if are they permanent? That feels very, very odd. Flipping heck. That's going to be interesting. Anyway, that's for the prediction video coming up in a few weeks' time. Yes, I feel vindicated. I've been backing Lincoln City for a while as dark horses. They've got over the line. I know I only said playoffs, but they've done much better than that. 5th place, Huddersfield Town, finishing 9th. A very poor season for Huddersfield. I think most people at the start of the season will be like, automatic promotion or at least playoffs. To have not had that is a poor season for the Terriers. Really, really bad. How? But we just got to question so much in terms of Huddersfield at the moment. We're probably going to go up and say they're going to be in playoffs next season because of the stature and size of that club. It wasn't that long ago they were in the Premier League. And now they're looking at a protracted stay in League One. Wycombe Wanderers I had as fourth. They, they're one of them ones that I thought they were I think they were in the playoffs last season in 24-25 and had some great moments in recent years, haven't they, Wycombe? I think maybe this season they've come to settle down. The dust has maybe settled a bit and all the hype around Wycombe has sort of disapparated and been given to Lincoln maybe or Stevenage. Is that right with Stevenage? A bit local. So yeah, maybe the fairy dust has gone a bit at that club. Doncaster Rovers I had in third. They finished in 14th. That was probably a bit of a bad prediction, but I thought Grant McCann, he's a good manager at League One level, and I still stick by what I say about that. Whether I think Doncaster have managed to get a good season to build upon, though. I think that is fair to say. And watch this space next season. Second place, Port Vale. We're going to just ignore that completely because they finished in 22nd. That was an awful prediction. Darren Moore was good with West Brom. Right? If we look back where he was in 2018-19 with West Brom, did a fantastic job. So what has happened to Darren Moore since? Some serious questions are going to be asked of why he's fallen off so much. And Luton Town, I had to win the league. I think a lot of people were like, yeah, that sounds like a fair enough prediction. They were in Premier League not that long ago. How they didn't even get playoffs? How they didn't get playoffs is absolutely ridiculous. We're looking at a Luton side that, in all honesty, have been crap. They've been absolutely crap. It's just like you're watching his Luton side in slow motion be teared to pieces. I feel bad for the Hatters fans. I really do, because you've gone from the joys of a Premier League to now not even reaching the playoffs of League One. How do you feel? Right, in the Championship, it was fairly obvious I was going to go with Sheffield Wednesday as last place. I don't think I really even needed to explain it. They won 0 points, by the way. They're lucky that they didn't get minus points this season as their overall total. But you could just tell. You could really just tell that Sheffield Wednesday just didn't have the squad and that they were just going to be cast off and chucked into the bin and, flushed down to the toilets of League One. And we're there. We're at this position now. New owners come in. Great chance to rebuild. Whether they get, straight back, I'm not quite convinced of yet, but we'll see. But yeah, Sheffield Wednesday got a big rebuild on their hands. 23rd, Hull City. Right. I know they are promoted to the Premier League and got 6th place. But you got to put myself in the frame of mind of where we were 10 months ago. There was not a chance in hell that any of you were going to come out and say that Hull City were going to be playoffs. Not a single one of you would have thought that. They just scraped survival of a Championship. They had a transfer embargo, I believe. Yeah, a transfer embargo. Some person called Sherjov Yakirovic, who no one had ever heard of. He never had any experience with Championship or English football that much, and came from a Turkish side called Kayserispor. No one knew anything about what it was like. Yeah, okay, they had a decent enough defence. Like, don't get me wrong, that defence was a strong defence. But their attack was like, what? There was no way for that attack. They only scored 70 goals, but still a lot of goals, a lot of dependence, I must say, upon certain players. But they have absolutely far outperformed everyone in the country's expectations. 22nd, Leicester City. Most people will call me mad for this one, but let's look at the overall situation. Firstly, it is highly likely that they will get a 9-point deduction, which creates a mental mountain to climb, especially after a very poor season last season that resulted in relegation. They have got a very negative mentality to start the season, and to make things worse is all the changes at the club. With Marty Cifuentes only managing in the Championship to keep QPR in the Championship, and then following a mid-table finish, and they've now lost Jamie Vardy, And I could go on, but if you want to, you can go back and watch that video. I feel completely vindicated. They actually didn't even get 9 points deducted. It was 6 points deducted, and it was in the middle, like towards the end of the season at this point in time. It took them so long to drag it out, and they were involved in a relegation battle well before they got that point deduction. So absolutely thinking that they were being relegated, it's probably been worse than even I imagined. I think even if I think they just stay up if you add the 6 points back on. But then at that point, you also would add the 2 points for West Brom back on. So if we were to remove all point deductions, so they would still go down in that position. So it's been a bad season for the Foxes, and I'm tempted to say they're going to get an immediate return. We'll have to see, but I'm strongly tempted to say there'll be an immediate return for the club. But it's got to go down as one of the worst things to have happened, or most crazy storylines to have happened in recent years. A team that in 10 seasons ago from this season, won the Premier League. We're now facing League One football and an away trip to Bromley. Say that to somebody 10 years ago, they've just lifted the crown, Jamie Vardy lifting a Premier League trophy. And you turn around and say to them, in 10 years' time, this side is going to be relegated to League One, where they'll play that mid-table side in the National League, Bromley. No one would believe you. Not a single person. Football is mad. 21st Blackburn Rovers, they finished in 20th. It was about where we expected them to be. A lot of people sort of probably wouldn't have expected it. They were up in the playoffs last season. Or I think they were just outside it, actually. But, we took John Eustace at Derby. We took a lot of their good players as well. It was one of them ones that the club had been stripped of everything. And they're quite lucky, in fact, to actually stay up. I thought it was always going to be a difficult season, and it has transpired to be so. I don't know if they stay up, next season. We'll have to see. It's going to be a difficult one. It really, really is. Blackburn are one of them teams that are notorious, I think, are going to at least spend the next few seasons involved in a relegation battle. I can't see them progressing. The owners aren't backing them for love nor money. 20th, Middlesbrough. Oh, that's not a good one. That hurts. Now, actually, I will say now, Rob Edwards as an inspired manager is not that far wrong of saying it was not a good thing. I mean, Kim Hellberg, I don't think anyone expected him to be as good as he was. Obviously, they haven't been promoted, right? They finished in 5th and lost the playoffs, and there was that whole situation where they got a bye through to the playoff final. We know all of this, right? We've been over this ground before. But Rob Edwards, he jumped ship. Middlesbrough then sunk a bit. So Rob Edwards was clearly overperforming my expectations. But in fairness, you draw the comparison with Rob Edwards for what was his previous manager job. I can only look at what his past record is. I don't know what he's going to do in the future. His past record, we're getting Luton back-to-back relegation. This season, he's got Wolves relegated as well. So he's not a good... I still don't rate Rob Edwards. And, the one thing that... A large caveat I did have about Hayden Hackney moving. He didn't. He stayed with the club. I don't think he stays with the club, by the way, this season. There's no way that they don't cash on him now. But as soon as he also was injured, by the way, Hayden Hackney, the club started decreasing in going down. So it was a bad prediction. I acknowledge that. But again, I'm not changing my opinion on Rob Edwards because of it. 19th, Wrexham. They finished in 7th, which is really annoying. Really, really annoying because I don't like Wrexham. I don't think most of the EFL like Wrexham. There'll be a time coming up where they are punished for FFP, I do feel. Because they don't have a lot of sellable assets, by the way. they very much sort of find themselves in that position where how are they going to react next season when suddenly there's a lot of changes in the rules, by the way. I don't know how much of it you know about the changing the PSR rules, because I haven't really gone over it into this channel too much. But essentially, you can only spend match day revenue and then a certain percentage more input by the owner. That's going to really negatively impact a club like Wrexham, which is a tiny stadium. Okay, yes, they're selling a lot of shirt sales, which, does help the club, but it doesn't. It's like they're still going to be adversely affected from it, I think. So watch this space. I think Wrexham have got a lot less money to play around with now. 18th, Oxford United. They finished in 22nd. I think maybe we should have seen that on the cards, quite possibly. And, I think maybe I should have. My reasoning was Gary Rowett is a good manager. And I think I'm going to be beginning to have to change my mind about Gary Rowett now. Maybe his time for Championship football and bearing out results has gone. He was quite good at getting results, just not anymore. 17th, Charlton Athletic, finished in 19th, 2 points behind 17th place Stoke. It's about where I expected them to be. There were some good players in that squad, but it was sort of one of them ones that you sort of knew that it was always going to be a bit of a struggle. And Charlton are always going to struggle in the Championship for at least the foreseeable future anyway. So it's one of them ones that they stayed up and will probably be in a similar position next season. 16th, Birmingham City. They finished in 10th. A lot of people backed Blues for back-to-back promotions, and I didn't, and I feel a bit vindicated in that regard. But it's one of them ones that Birmingham, I think, did struggle with what I thought they would struggle with. They weren't allowed to play their game as much. There was that one time which I did a live watch along. They absolutely smashed Sheffield United to pieces, wasn't it? I can't remember which way that was, but I did a live watch. It was in the EFL Cup, and it was a great, great game to watch. And it was just watching Birmingham just absolutely perform like mad. I'm just going to see now how that ended up. I believe, because I had one of the best goals in football I've seen in a while, actually. Ended up 2-1 to Birmingham City. It was a late Jay Stansfield winner, actually. But Birmingham absolutely dominated it. 20 shots for Birmingham to Sheffield United's 5, going back into this archive. And then I think people began to figure out Birmingham. And they were, for a while, in that lower mid-table, actually. And then suddenly, they adapted their play and went up a bit. So they could well have finished 16th if they didn't adapt their play, is what I would say. 15th, Stoke City, finished in 17th. Not too much difference. It's poor, isn't it, Stoke? I feel sorry for Stoke fans because the heydays of being, I think they were even in Europe at one point, but certainly a mid-table team in the Premier League. They become mid-table in the Championship, which is a lot worse. There's no worse a feeling than being a mid-table side in the Championship, because it means that you're in a position, especially for as long as they've been. You put them at categories: Stoke, Preston, and Bristol City. It's not an aspiring group of people, is it? And just get bored. And another one, actually, Queen's Park Rangers was had in 14th, which actually finished 15th. You could just probably stack these around in different orders, and you could probably figure out that one of the ones that you put down are going to be mid-table somewhere. And it was the case with Queen's Park Rangers, in that one. So that's just no one. I had 13th place Bristol City, and they were in 12th. yet again, keep on putting all of them in mid-table. In any order, there's always going to be there. 12th, I had Preston North End. They finished in 14th. They're really just the teams where you can just flip them around and it doesn't matter too much. And 11th place, Watford, which finished in 16th. I think they had 5 straight defeats at the end of the season. A very underwhelming season, all considering, for Watford. I thought at least, if the season finished, a solid 10 games earlier, they would have been in that position of, outside of the playoffs. They looked like they could potentially sneak in. That 11th place didn't look too far as a bad prediction at that point, and then they just bombed out of it. And looking at that, a lot of people did say that Watford were likely to finish in the playoffs or just outside it. But they were not. They were in mid-table, and I feel like I was right in saying they were going to be mid-table. I was just not expecting how bad they're going to be. And obviously, they've appointed another new manager, but that's just another day in Watford's career, isn't it? I mean, we'll probably get rid of him in about 3 months' time. 10th place, Millwall. I was really surprised to see Millwall third. Really surprised. They were a side that I thought, good defensively, probably not as good going forward. And that sort of issue was going to be a bit of a problem. And, it kind of did span out like that. They scored only 64 goals. Very low scoring team, but their defense of 49 goals conceded was a fantastic defense. And they ground out results far better than I thought. I think a lot of people looking on the eyes of Millwall thinking, this is going to be a team in 10th. But it wasn't, it was a team that managed to get into the top 3, regularly going toe-to-toe with some of the biggest teams. I had 9th place Coventry City. We've got to think about it in this one, is that we were in a position where Mark Robins had sort of left the club in an absolute lurch in time by getting sacked, and everything felt a bit off about Coventry. I mean, what a thing to turn around. And it was Thomas Asante especially turned it on this season. That, for me, was a big, big change for Coventry to actually get them to win the league, because their inconsistent players were far more consistent. And I did end up with a bit of egg on my face, they did end up competing at the right top end of the season. 8th place Norwich City, they finished in 9th. I feel like that was roughly the right call to make. Liam Manning, decent enough manager. Although a lot of people, I think, are beginning to not rate him, which is a bit of a strange one. Well, I suppose it makes sense. He wasn't the greatest, to be fair. Norwich were in 23rd, and he was sacked. And then he went to Huddersfield Town and didn't do great there. Okay. Now I understand, having just looked at that briefly. Probably should have said that before thinking. It was Philip Clement was the one who was really built something. He was at Rangers, wasn't he? And, I think Norwich may be in a bit of an exciting position for next season. I could definitely see them getting back into the playoffs soon. There's just a bit of inconsistency overall with Norwich's season. I think I never really looked at that Norwich side and thought, we're going to get playoffs this season. I didn't once think that. So that is a bit of a concern. 7th, Derby County. Now, I didn't know if this was considered as a dark horse or not, but a lot of people considered Derby to be vastly improving, and I was amongst them. As a Derby fan, I said 7th. We finished in 8th. It was probably about where we were going to finish. We were competitive. We were strong. I don't mind the fact we weren't in the playoffs because we're not prepared to be in the Premier League. It's on fucking YouTube. It's downstairs.
Oh, sorry.
So, in that position, I'm saying that Derby County were in a position where we were in a strong position, and we were going to. I think there's good ground base to improve upon. In all honesty, and Moving on, we got 6th place Swansea City. And they didn't do that well this season. Really, really didn't. They were I think you look at Swansea, they should be doing better than they did. 5th place, West Bromwich Albion. Yeah, that prediction aged like sour milk. And, it's one of them ones that a lot of people probably a bit surprised about this with West Brom. They were a team that were for a lot of people, they've been in playoffs recently. 4th place, Portsmouth. Yeah, I don't know why I said that. We're going to skip over that. I really don't know why I said that. I really don't. That is a mental prediction. I can't think of any reason why I said that. 3rd place, Southampton. This is a decent enough prediction. Southampton were a team that finished in 4th place. They were a team that were, it was fairly obvious that they were going to be in and amongst it in that position. And they were, and they obviously got thrown out of the playoffs and the rest is history. But if they were still in it, you wouldn't back them. They probably would have won it, to be honest. I think so. That's probably went into part of consideration. 2nd place, Ipswich got that nailed on. That was a dead right prediction. I think it was a bit obvious, it was a lot of good foresight against McKenna and keeping him at the helm. Sheffield United, I actually had to win the league. How bad were they? I thought, they bought Chris Wilder back, or was it Ruben Sellers at the time? And I thought, they were going to do really well. Sheffield United are that type of squad. They could do quite well. Okay, going into the Premier League, and I had Sunderland to actually finish bottom. They are definitely a team that overperformed this season. I think everybody would have thought that Sunderland, the way they got promoted, they were a bit, counter-attacking football, and it didn't seem... They've done a phenomenal job. The Mackhams must be well and truly proud of this team. 19th, Burnley. It wasn't much of a surprise to think that Burnley, because they're just a bit of a yo-yo team, it was a very, very obvious sort of situation what was going to end up happening. They'll probably go up next season. 18th, I had Leeds. And Leeds, 14th place. Very, very good season, all things considering, for Leeds. And, I think Leeds have suddenly cemented themselves, and maybe they can be a mid-table Premier League team again. We'll have to see. 17th, Newcastle United. Newcastle in mid-table. I think they did have that fall off. If they didn't have that uptick towards the end of the season, they could have finished around about 17, because there was a time that they were really having that drag through the mire. And they were actually worried about relegation. Some of the Geordies online, a bit hyperbolic per se, but 17th wouldn't have been a hugely bad prediction at that point. 16th, West Ham. I thought they were bang average, but I hadn't considered how good the teams coming up were, because if Sunderland and Leeds weren't as good as they were, West Ham would have been in 16th. That is very much. But, that's what ifs and maybes. But it's very much, I think it's been quite bad, actually, but West Ham have been relegated. How they've managed to do that is beyond me. 15th, Brighton. They actually finished 8th. A very solid season for Brighton. But, they lost João Pedro and Estupiñán. But yet again, their recruitment has been second to none. But... yeah, I thought, they'd lost that major goal threat. Maybe they'd lost a bit of their edge and they'll drop down a bit. But not in the slightest. Not in the slightest. 14th place, Bournemouth. how they've got into Europe is absolutely beyond me. I did suspect Areola wouldn't last the whole season, though. I thought that a bigger club would take him. So part of me was thinking, in hindsight, I could, well, if Areola did leave halfway through, I think you could probably make the justification that Bournemouth probably would have finished mid-table. And I think next season could be a bit of a struggle in all reality. So, yeah, I think keep your eyes out on Bournemouth. I don't think they're going to necessarily improve much. 13th place Manchester United. They finished third. A very good season for Manchester United. I thought, they're going to end up being a bit of a mid-table team. They didn't seem to have improved that much, but clearly Carrick has got the best out of his men in this team and have got them all firing up again. So clearly Manchester United done better than I thought. I had in 12th place Brentford, which, Brentford are mid-table. That is about where you'd expect them to be. 11th place Everton. They were in 13th. They were also quite mid-table. Very much an expectation of Everton. David Moyes has been a successful manager in the past. 10th, Wolves. Now, this was a bad one, but to be honest with you, Wolves were a bit of an unknown quantity at the beginning of the season. You had Vitor Pereira come in. You had, Larson came in and then had Cunha. And, I thought that's going to be a solid attacking duo. And, that the rest sort of speaks of history about how bad they've overall been. But they've made wrong managerial appointments. They made bad signings, and I think they've been in decline for a while, so maybe I should have seen writing on the wall. 15th place with Crystal Palace, when I thought they were going to be 9th. Maybe a bit of an underwhelming season. They had, to be fair, they did win the Conference League, so I think maybe they're focusing a bit on Europe. I don't know. But I thought they could have finished in the top half, carried by that momentum of the FA Cup. But as some of these mid-table sides are beginning to find out with more and more European football, that they then struggle to know which one to focus on because they don't have the squad depth. 8th, Fulham. They finished 11th, but only 1 point behind 8th. They could well have finished 8th, and I think great season so far by Marco Silva and spell at Fulham, and he can continue to grow. 7th, Tottenham Hotspur. Yeah. So I thought it was just a fundamental underperformance, a one-off off-season. And Thomas Frank, he'd done a good job with Brentford. He could have rebuilt Spurs from the top down and, get back into that sort of European fight again and make it like Europa League or something. Absolutely none of it. They've had another horrid season. You know what? We may have to predict another one because how long is this going to last on? 6th, I had Chelsea. They were horrific this season. 10th, by the way. I thought being 6th was thinking, what? Chelsea, they always get Europe. They were going to underperform this season just as a one-off. Absolutely ridiculous to think that they were going to not even get European football. There's going to be a lot of questions asked. 5th, Nottingham Forest. I'm so happy I didn't get this one right. They were in the Champions League last season and this season, obviously, in the Europa League, and they've fallen off a cliff. So we're all very happy and they can continue going into their downward spiral and be relegated next season. Thank you very much. 4th, Aston Villa. Yes, they did finish 4th. Unai Emery's done it again. I think Aston Villa are beginning to formulate as a bit of a side that is regularly going to get Champions League football coming up in the next few seasons. And we could well see them challenge for the title in the near future. A few tweaks here, a few tweaks there. They can certainly, if they can get a bit of consistency, they certainly got the team that they can be able to. 3rd place, Liverpool. They actually finished 5th. I think it was quite a disappointing season for Liverpool. I did have worries, that sort of last summer with the tragic loss of Diego Jota, losing of Trent Alexander-Arnold, losing Luis Diaz. A lot of it was sort of a lot of losses in that team, and wasn't really ever fully replaced. And obviously, well, they tried to replace it with overpriced players like Florian Wirtz and Alexander Isak. And I think, Arne Slot's now gone, I think somewhat justifiably. You look at it, it's just that Liverpool are a team that really shouldn't just be sneaking into the playoffs on the last day of the season. Second place, Arsenal. They were a bit of a perennial bottle job. They were known as a bit of a, and you could say that, but it's a penalty shootout with the Champions League. It was always going to be a lottery. But yeah, Arsenal have actually got over a line and won the league title. And if they won the double, you can't make any more memes out of them. You suddenly start saying, yeah, they're a really good team. But they won the Premier League. Congratulations to them. I think they're going to struggle to hold it, but we'll see. And then first, Manchester City. With Pep gone next season, that could be a worrying sign. Anyway, that's by the by. They yet again have a bit of an underperforming season. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you are new around here, please do subscribe. That would be hugely appreciated. And I will see you all in the next one. Goodbye for now.